I'm more than happy to be transparent about it, and I'm more than happy to cooperate with everyone.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident is concerned, this is all of it?
This is everything. This is everything.
Did you ever meet with any other person from Russia that you know?
You know, I don't even know. I've probably met with other people from Russia, but certainly not in the context of a formalized meeting or anything like that, because why would I?
Well, he did actually in the meeting he was there discussing. Donald Trump Jr. speaking to Fox News on Tuesday night. But this morning, NBC News has learned there was someone else in that meeting between Donald Trump Jr., senior advisor Jared Kushner, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and a Russian lawyer. The man is said to be a Russian-American lobbyist, a former Soviet counterintelligence officer suspected by some U.S. officials of having ongoing ties to Russian intelligence. That's something he denies. NBC News is not naming that lobbyist, who denies any current ties to Russian spy agencies. Joining us now from Washington, NBC News correspondent Katie Tur, and from the White House, NBC national correspondent Peter Alexander. Peter, let me go to you right away. Any reaction yet from the White House on this story?
Yeah, you know, nothing yet from the White House. What's striking is this news broke just as the president and many of his advisors were boarding Air Force One. In fact, had already taken off en route back here to Washington. So it's likely that on that plane right now, they are getting some of this information. We had reached out, we should note, in advance of the reporting of this story, not just to Donald Trump Jr.'s team, but to Jared Kushner's team and Paul Manafort's team, all of whom provided us no comment on this reporting at the time. Strikingly, just yesterday, the president said of his son that there was zero impropriety. He said within the last 48 hours that he has been open and honest, transparent, innocent, I think was his word as well. But on this day, and I'm just reminded of this, I'm kind of struck by, you'll remember during the late debates between Hillary Clinton and President Trump, that each of them at the end of one of those debates was asked to say something nice about the other. And what Hillary Clinton said about Donald Trump is, I respect his children. I think she said something to the effect of, they're very able, they're devoted, and that says a lot about Donald. Well, obviously right now his children, at least his son, perhaps his son-in-law, are increasingly becoming liabilities right now. The voices, the chorus of frustration among Democrats right now who are not just focused on Donald Trump Jr., but on Jared Kushner himself, because he's uniquely positioned in this situation, as he's the only one who was a part of the campaign, a part of the transition, and now works side by side with the president. A lot of calls that his security clearance be revoked. We've spoken to security clearance experts about this, and in effect, the president is the security clearance czar. It's entirely up to him whether someone is allowed to have their clearance, whether they keep their clearances. It was described to us, if the president chose, he could give clearance to a homeless person on the street.
So, Katie Tur, I mean, obviously a lot of the focus on this story and this meeting has been on Donald Trump Jr., but to Peter's point, Jared Kushner was in that room, and the story from Donald Trump Jr. is that Kushner left after 7 or 8 minutes after he realized it wasn't what he thought it was going to be. That's just Donald Trump Jr.'s account, and increasingly now, as we learn, there was someone else, a fifth person in that meeting, not previously disclosed by Donald Trump Jr. or the White House, that all these elements of the story, that Kushner wasn't there, that Manafort wasn't there long, that Manafort was on his phone, could all be part of a cover story for what actually was happening in the room.
We just don't know, frankly. And let's be honest, this team of folks, this White House transition, the campaign, was not very good at being transparent or forthcoming at the time, and they're still not very good at being transparent. But this raises a lot of other really important questions, and I wrote a number of them down, so bear with me. I'm going to read them. Here are some of the other questions. Who else was there? Who else popped into that meeting? Did the president not really know about this meeting when he was a candidate at the time? And was this the last meeting? Did Russia or any intermediary never go back to Don Jr. and say, hey, listen, we do have more information. You did at the very least express interest in it. Here's what we can come up with further. And did Don Jr. never go back to his friend, Rob Goldstone or Ayman Agalarov, and say, hey, what was that? If nothing really came out of this meeting and they were looking forward to it, wouldn't he go back to his intermediary and say, hey, that wasn't anything. What else do you have? Or what happened there? Or is there more that we can find out? And why did nobody in that room go to the authorities after this? There is this argument, Willie, that this team did not know what they were doing. But the reality is, Paul Manafort knew what he was doing. He is a veteran of a number of campaigns. So maybe he didn't read that email all the way through. Give him that benefit of the doubt. But when he sat down in that meeting and he found out that this was a lawyer who was peddling information on Hillary Clinton and then trying to get sanctions lifted, at the very least, why didn't he go to authorities? Why didn't he raise a red flag? Why didn't he inform anybody in that campaign that this is not something you do? Listen, there were no rules at this campaign at the time. Very few people knew who was in charge, frankly. Very few people knew how to take in information. There was no opposition research team. There was barely a communications team. There was very little campaign structure. Ultimately, Donald Trump made all the decisions. So if Donald Trump made all the decisions and he was so granular as to signing checks every day, is it plausible to believe that his son-in-law, and his campaign chairman, who's trying to gain influence with him, would not go to him and say, hey, listen, we've got this information about Hillary Clinton, and it could help you. And at the time, Willie, remember, he was struggling. He was trying to make sure that they could hang on to the nomination at the convention, and then he was facing a very tough fight against Hillary Clinton, who everybody believed was the front runner.
Yeah, they were still at that point. I remember talking about a brokered convention. But Heidi, I'll say it again. I'm astounded that Donald Trump Jr. thought this story was going to pass without anyone realizing that there was more to the story than he was disclosing, or that the White House then would back up Donald Trump Jr.'s story, not thinking reporters were going to find out who exactly was in that room.
That's to my earlier point about why is the lying worth it? Well, if it's as bad as we think it is, and they were actually meeting directly with people directly connected to Putin and Russian intelligence, that explains the lie. But Katie identifies a very important point about what the president knew and how much more there still is to come out on that. Because here's what we know from just looking at media reports around that time. The president was physically in Trump Tower. Not only was he physically present that morning, afternoon, right before the meeting, he went to a luncheon where Paul Manafort was. So he was there, and he was interacting with the main person who was behind potentially that meeting. So there's, got to be additional information out there, surveillance tapes, whatever. And here's what's going to happen after this report. Those records requests that congressional committees have already wanted to make, because Chairman Burr and Warner have already said we want to request emails, financial information, that's going to be put on steroids, because those emails are highly suggestive that that is not just one email in isolation when it's mentioned that this is part of a Russian campaign, and Don Jr. doesn't say what Russian campaign.
Willie, the answer to your question is, how would they think they would possibly get away? I got one of Kellyanne's cards, and it's delusion. These people are deluded. The fact that they would actually get away with this and that this story was going to somehow move on.
Peter, logistically, can you give us a frame of reference for trying to, everybody would love, I think, to get these people on the record, their responses, their reactions to this story. What was the initial reaction in the White House when you asked for that reaction? I understand Air Force One is in the air and everything like that, but I mean, come on, someone's got to react.
Well, let's be clear, nothing back as this reporting has come out, but in advance of our reporting, and as a part of the team that helped try to gather up on this, we had reached out to all the parties associated with this. And I mean, privately, the gist is they say, how can we remember all these details from way back then? Publicly, right now, there is no sort of formal comment coming from the individuals as they represent Don Jr., Manafort, and Jared Kushner. I should note that a source with direct knowledge of these discussions tells me that in recent days, there have been conversations between the outside legal counsels for the younger Trump, Don Trump Jr., the president's counsel, as well as Jared Kushner's private attorneys, about, as they describe it, making sure that both they and their clients are, in their words, more disciplined about sort of following the traditional protocols of discussing this case, this Russia matter, which in simple English is they realized that Jared Kushner shouldn't just be walking into the Oval Office and having casual conversations, as has been reported, with the president and saying, like, hey, I did take a meeting a little while ago. This isn't going to be a big deal, but I just wanted to make you aware. The bottom line is they are reinforcing, recognizing the stakes here, that they now have to sort of wall off one another in a way so they don't allow this to grow any further than it already has. And obviously, based on the latest reporting, will continue to.
You know, Willie, one of the things it's got to be bedeviling a number of people involved in this story within the Trump administration is if you talk to any veteran criminal prosecutor or any veteran homicide cop, they will tell you the hardest thing to remember is a lie.
And the President of the United States spent the last 2 days in France, including at a joint press conference with the French president, defending his son, Donald Trump Jr., in this story. And now with the new wrinkle, we'll see what the White House has to say. Peter Alexander, Katie Tur, thank you both. And ahead, we'll bring in NBC News intelligence and national security reporter Ken Delaney for his reporting on this breaking story. Again, the revelation there was a fifth person in the room, a former Soviet counterintelligence officer at that meeting in June of 2016 that included Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, and Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya. Much more on this breaking news straight ahead.